Hi everyone, and welcome to the concluding webinar of the series, The How and Why of Annotating. If you are experiencing any audio or visual issues tonight, please first try the audio wizard tool up in the tools options. And if that doesn't work, please type in the chat box that you need help, and either myself or the event moderator will assist you. We are excited to have Lorena O. English here to finish her series. So without any further ado, let's welcome Lorena.
Hi, this is Lorena O. English, and I'm going to be doing part 2 of the how and why of annotating. And the theme of today's webinar is putting it all together. If you have questions about this, you'll notice that my email address is right here on the slide, along with my Twitter account, and you're welcome to contact me in either way. We'll go ahead and get started. So, wait a minute, let's actually go to my next slide. And first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about introductions, and I'm going to introduce myself first. And you can see a few sort of stylized versions of me here, as well as a picture of my beloved dog Heidi. But you'll notice the picture in the middle is kind of a not very good picture of me, but it's actually me last week. I took the week off and I went traveling in 4 states, and I went to 3 baseball games and 4 presidential libraries. So here I am in a presidential library, and you can see the cool things behind me are archive boxes. These actually have documents from that particular president. So I wanted to kind of give everyone a chance to actually introduce themselves and ask you for your favorite travel location or your favorite travel memory.
It looks like our event moderator likes tropical places like Hawaii.
Ooh, good choice. Anyone else?
It looks like Kari last summer went to Canada and Alaska by driving.
Another driving person. We drove 2,000 miles on our trip last week. It was pretty crazy. Well, we're not driving now, at least I hope we're not. We're actually here to talk a little bit about annotation, so let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of for a reminder, I want to do a very brief overview of what I talked about, I guess 2 weeks ago, which was my initial session, the framework for annotation, for at least for talking about annotation, because one of the things that I emphasized was that annotation is a very personal thing, that I can give suggestions and cues, but you pretty much have to work a system out yourself. So I talked a little bit about how kind of annotating on the page, kind of this marginalia, not just highlighting or underlining or blocking, but actually kind of writing in annotations, and kind of came up with a number of C's within the larger notion of conversation. Conventions, consistent methods for doing things, so that you know if you do something a certain way, that it's always going to be that way. For example, if I'm doing something, if I'm putting in my own comment, will enclose it in a forward bracket, so I know that that's me and not something else. Comprehending how to read an article, understanding the structure of an article, and many science and social science articles follow the line of what's called IMRID, for Introduction, Literature Review, Methods, Results, and Discussion. Contextualizing is that you're not just reading for content, you're reading for a broader notion of material, information about the author, information about the discipline, what audience is the article intended for, what kind of information type is it, what's the methodology. So all things to think about that help you kind of contextualize what you're actually reading. You know, is it an opinion piece? Is it textual analysis? Is it experimentation? Is it bench work? All those sorts of things. Classifying, these are going to be sort of the hard part of the annotation, where you're actually going through and organizing and pulling out what is the thesis, what are the themes, what are the ideas, what is the evidence. You're having a conversation with the paper and you're interrogating it, sort of, in a way. Critiquing, this is the important one. What worked? What didn't work? What was convincing? What wasn't convincing? And finally, connecting, and that is connecting the article to other articles that you've read, books that you've read, to your own knowledge, and to the content that takes place within your class. So you always want to kind of connect what you're reading to other types of information. So now that we've kind of looked back a little bit about what we talked about last week, and if you are watching this video and didn't watch the other one, you'll be able to watch an archive of that video on the Global Campus YouTube channel a little bit later. So let's go ahead and start the new stuff. So the first thing is, why do we annotate? And the first answer for that is on the short term, we annotate to review. That's kind of cheating because it's actually the short term and the longer term and the longest term, because we read to understand, we read to comprehend, and we also annotate so that later on, when we're reading the article, we can also be reviewing it and understanding it at the same time. So a very basic function. On a longer term, there is starting to understand the significance of the article, especially, or the book chapter, or whatever your text, web page, whatever your text is, and understanding it kind of within the context of other things that you have read. Is this a stronger analysis of this particular topic than something else that you read? Finally, we look at the longest term, which is the notion of the discipline. And this is where, over time, as you read articles, as you annotate them, as you really sort of start to learn them, you start to learn the discipline of these articles in your bones, especially for the discipline that you're in, sociology, physics, English, whatever. The more you read, the more you think about it, the more you annotate, the more you pull out the important parts, the more you understand how the discipline works. You can trace it over time. What are the styles? What are the conventions? What are the arguments? What are the methodological schisms? What are the mores? Who cites who, and what citation style do they use? All of these things tell us something about a discipline over time. So we're really kind of sketching the discipline. We're really looking at the big picture. So those are all reasons why we annotate, and these are all sort of philosophical reasons. What it really comes down to is we annotate to understand. So let's look at the next question, which is, what do you do with annotations? And I actually put these bullet points in completely wrong order. So we're going to start with the first aspect of it, which is that last week or 2 weeks ago, I was talking about annotating a text as you go along. Marginalia or annotating on a separate piece of paper, that's easier. So now it's time to start thinking about putting things together and thinking more broadly, summarizing and calling out what's significant to your needs, both the primary need of why you're reading the article, writing a paper, studying for an exam, etc., and the longer-term article of really starting to understand the larger conversation about this topic within a discipline or multiple disciplines. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the value of creating annotated bibliographies, and not just if you have to do it for an assignment. A little bit of extra time to create an annotated bibliography where you put things together, annotate them, put them all together so you can read them together can be really valuable. Finally, the thing is that there are multiple kinds of annotations. So if you're doing this for a class, you really want to make sure that you're annotating it the way your professor wants. I have actually, given people assignments requiring annotation, and I've been very clear that I don't just want a summary. I don't just want a descriptive annotation. I also want a critical annotation where you're pulling out, what works, what doesn't work, what are the significant points, what are the flaws, what are the good things. And too often I get back something that is merely descriptive rather than descriptive and critical. So I really emphasize that. Make sure you understand what somebody's looking for. So if you were here 2 weeks ago, I actually gave a small, not really homework assignment, where I wanted people to think about writing a synopsis of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So I'm going to go ahead and read you mine and kind of talk about this a little bit as a way of basically training yourself to take a story that everybody knows, or an article or whatever, and basically bring it down to its basic elements. So let's take a look. This is my annotation, my summary annotation of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. A young girl invades the home of three bears while they are away. She disturbs their breakfast and intrudes into their bedroom, falling asleep in the room of the youngest bear, who has a bed that fits her body frame. When she is discovered by the bear, she runs off. So you see, I've lost the poetry, the drama of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but I have pulled out the essential points of it to the point where I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I understand the point of this story. So that's kind of a silly example, but it's actually a really good way to think about training yourself to write annotations. Reading a short story, reading a fairy tale, and then basically thinking about it a second and coming up with an annotation. So, anybody have any questions at this point or want to comment on my brief summary of Goldilocks and the Three Bears? All right, we'll go ahead and go on. So This is a tool that I use to help me put things together. And let me kind of go back a little bit, because what I do is I start off, of course, with annotating the article. And then what I do is I want to kind of think about the article in a broader way. And this is where I move from individual annotations of the parts of the article to really thinking about the article as a full object. So I created what I call my reading matrix. And this works for me. It's one way. It's not the only way, but it works for me. And you can see the elements. I have the place where I can put the project name, I can put the date, and I can put the citation of the article. And usually I do this by hand, but you could also do this by in print too. And I have 4 boxes here. The first box is for terms, and you can see this is where I might put in, as I go along, terms that might be good search terms in library databases or internet search engines. And I also might put down terms that I don't know the meaning of, that I want to actually find the definition of. And then I'll go ahead and write that definition down, because the best way to internalize something is to actually write it out. So that's kind of what I do. The second box is my summary, or my major points, and this is where I'm going to put my synopsis of the article. My third box is my critique, what works, what doesn't, and my fourth box is my ideas. What does the sum total of all of this mean? How might I use this in my paper? What sort of ideas did this generate? How is this a jumping off point to something? And I find this to be very, very useful. I do it at the end of reading an article. I think I stop for a second. I might think about it. I might review it very quickly, my annotations, and then I come up with this based upon that information. And then what I do is I take it and I staple it to the paper, very front. So when I'm looking at, we all think about how we all work with papers. We take them, we mark all over again a stapled copy of it. So this is my cover sheet. So here's my citation up there so I know what it is, and here's the basic points. So I can use this and look at it and refer to it. And like I said, this is just my way of doing it. You may choose something else. You may choose to add a square for evidence, maybe in the middle, or get rid of one of these sorts of things if you don't feel the need to have terms. But this sort of idea of creating a matrix of important things can be really valuable. Any questions about this? Okay, so let's go over and actually look at an example that I did. So I did this based upon an article that I wrote with a couple of colleagues. And you can see here it is. The project is my graphic novel paper for English 999. There is no English 999. I made that up. Notice that I put the date down, and then also notice that I put my initials there. So that reminds me that I did this. And this sort of thing actually can be really important. Part of the whole process of annotating is to try to, make sure that you prevent yourself from plagiarizing. Indicating very carefully when something is your own, through your conventions versus something that is quotation or somebody else's comment. Here's my citation, right here. And then let's go ahead and look at my boxes. So here's my term box. And you can see I'm kind of interested in the terminology. This is an article about graphic novels in academic libraries that I wrote with a couple of colleagues, I guess, 9 years ago. So here I'm really interested in the terminology, that there are alternatives. So I'm putting some terminology information in there. That's useful to me both for extra terms that I might put inside a database or a search engine, but also, maybe mixing it up a little bit when I actually write my paper, using some different terms myself. And if I find something interesting, I'm going to put that in there. Here's a very librarian sort of thing. One of the things that the article mentioned is talking a little bit about how graphic novels are cataloged in library databases. And I actually came up with a specific term for cartoons or cartooning, and I was like, is that still used? Or have we gone on to that? So I had a little checklist note to remind myself. What I might do also, if I've done this by hand, which I normally do, is actually one of my conventions is 2 long arrows and an arrow saying watch this, and a circle that when I've done it, I actually check. So I know that I've actually followed through with this. And then here's an example, a question to myself, a term I was unfamiliar with, and I'm looking for the definition, and then I'll go look it up and I'll write it in here, right here. So this is kind of my terms box. Now here's my summary box. And again, this is based upon the experience of annotating. You want to write your summary very quickly after reading an article. Read your article, annotate it as you go, put it down, think about it, maybe look back at a few things, and then write something. Now this particular summary you can see is kind of a narrative. It doesn't have to be. If you want to use a bulleted list, if you want to use an outline, if you want to use the structure of the article itself with the headings, that's something that you might do as well. So these are all things that you might, ways that you might do things. So one idea is if you're like me, I actually tend to speak sometimes a little bit more coherently than I write. I'm kind of good at coming up with things off the cuff. Sometimes, not always. So one of the things that I do sometimes is I actually, pull out my cell phone and I actually may record my summary, or I may do voice to text to actually get, a document that I can use, because it's easier for me to just blurt it out and then go back and edit it. And I may edit this multiple times over the course of time. So the crucial thing about this is that you do write your annotation in your own words, which is why it is really good to kind of put it down and actually just kind of come off of it. And then you really do have to go back and make sure that you're not accidentally plagiarizing. Because, the thing is that you may plagiarize completely by accident, but you're still going to get in big trouble if you do. So you really want to kind of make sure that you do that. And remember, one of my conventions for paraphrasing is that I will put in kind of a little, let's see if I can kind of draw this. I'll put in a little bracket, and then I'll write in para P colon, and then I know everything that comes out of it until the other bracket is a paraphrase. So, I have these conventions that I use consistently, and that really helps me a lot. Any questions about this? Okay, so let's move to the rest of the matrix, the critique and the ideas. And you can see here I'm doing something that I probably should have done a little bit more. I'm making sure that when I comment on something that I'm putting in a page number. Here I'm really pissed off because the authors of this paper actually call graphic novels a genre, whereas it's really a format. And I do note that they call it a format in most places. I think at least once myself wrote it calling it a genre, so it's kind of embarrassing. But you can see that I have a little bit of myself in here. Remember this notion of annotation is not losing your voice. An annotation is very personal. It doesn't have to be, very removed. It can have a sense of your own voice. And you can see here I'm using bullet points, a good broad overview. Notice a little bit of my kind of connections right over here. I'm commenting that this article is widely cited. If I look it up on Google Scholar, I see that it's been cited 52 times. So something else that gives me a sense of the significance of this. A nice little emphasis, a little bit of positive critique here, nice emphasis on pre-service teachers. Something that I'm happy with, it explains why graphic novels are shelved in different places, why a whole bunch of them are here and then they're randomly all over the library. But here I get into my negative critique. It needed more information on faculty buy-in, and is it appropriate for librarians to push graphic novels to faculty, to encourage them to use it in class, or is that stepping outside of what we should be doing? And finally, another element of my critique is I really felt, and I wrote this article, I really felt that the article needed data. I wish that they had done a survey of academic libraries and graphic novels or librarians to get a sense of attitudes and how they're actually being used. So you can see this is something that might be very valuable to me if I'm actually kind of writing a critique of that particular paper. Finally, you notice some ideas. And again, I'm actually typing this. Normally I handwrite it. Here I put this thing here because I saw a mention of something, the National Association of Comic Arts Educators. I'm like, woo, I need to go check this out. And then I write myself a note. What's the contrary view? Is graphic novels more a public library function? And you can see again the personal voice I'm responding with. So I'm making this something, a dialogue with myself. Here I'm asking, maybe I should do a follow-up study of attitudes. Has this already been done? And I'm noting that this article was written in 2006 and it's now 2009, and a lot has happened with academic libraries and graphic novels in 9 years. Some ideas for following up. And you can see my emphasis, my to-do thing right over here where I put my little arrow and maybe my circle. Maybe I want to write about focusing on pre-service teachers. I know a couple of pre-service teachers who are in the education program. Maybe I should interview them. Oh, I need to ask the professor if it's okay to interview other students. Maybe I would like to think a little bit more about artists as creators, because so often people emphasize the writers and not the articles. And then finally, a note to myself, see if I can work graphic novels into my own classwork, and classwork kind of got dropped over there. So you can see this is very personal, and it's very useful to me later on. It gives me some ideas, etc. And at any point, you know, I might edit this, I might scratch it out, I might, you know, and if it gets too messy, I might redo the whole thing, kind of start all over again. Any questions about this? Okay, so I'm going to move on. And here's an example of a finished annotation, and this is for my article. And you'll notice I'm missing something here. It's really sloppy of me that I have an annotation, but what I don't have is my citation. You know, anytime you do an annotation, always put the citation up there at the very top. That was really sloppy on my part, and I'm ashamed of it. So let's take a look at what I've done. The first part of here is my summary, my sort of straightforward, just the fact summary. This is what the article is about. This is what it discovers. I'm highlighting things, not everything. Remember, you know, I don't necessarily want to have everything in here. What I'm really doing is pulling out the highlights. And not necessarily, you know, and the highlights that are important to me and for my purposes. So that's kind of what I'm doing there. Okay, so very, very straightforward. Now you'll notice I start going to the other C's. You know, I'm talking a little bit here, giving some of that broader information. This is a scholarly article from a high-impact, significant journal, peer-reviewed academic journal that's geared to academic librarians. So I'm saying, look at this. This article is published in a journal that has as its audience exactly the people that this article is talking about. And then I talk about how I found it useful because, and I'm kind of explaining this. And then I have a little bit about my critique here. I wish it had done this. I wish it had done that. And then again, I go back to this idea of, you know, kind of understanding the article in a larger sense, the connection part. The authors are academic librarians, and the lead author has written a book chapter in this particular book, which might also remind me that I should probably read the book. So you can see this would be very helpful to me, and this is something that I could include in an annotated bibliography. So there I have it, and this is based upon, you know, my initial annotation of the article and the stuff that I put in my reading matrix here, however you want to do yours. So any questions about this as an example of a finished annotation? Notice again, both a descriptive aspect and a more critical aspect, and the part that so often people also leave out of annotations, which is why is this useful? And not just useful in a circular way. This article is useful because it's about librarians and graphic novels, which you know have to figure out from the title, but actually explaining this is useful because it explains the location, this is useful because they give some examples of how it's significant, you know, and it says here that this is a persuasive essay rather than a data-driven research report. Any questions? Okay. So let's go on, and here we need to backtrack a little bit, because you notice I've kind of been emphasizing the notion of paper, you know, because if you write stuff down on paper, that is the best way to remember it. And there's a lot of research on that, you know. It's for WSU students who are listening to this, if you read The A-Game, which is you know, a short book that WSU has promoted the last couple of years about succeeding in college, they talk a lot about the value of actually handwriting notes, handwriting annotations, etc., because it's sort of a muscle memory. But the problem is that paper is ephemeral. This is an image of what might have been, you know, scrolls, and the actual the website is actually talking about the Library of Alexandria, which was burned, you know, many times. And there's so many things that can happen to a piece of paper. So let's think of the situation. I read an article, I annotate the heck out of it, I fill out my matrix, I staple it, it's all there, it's wonderful, it's great. First of all, what happens if I'm in class and we're talking about this article and I don't have the printout? Second of all, what if something happens to the printout? You know, I lose it, my dog threw up on it, I left it at my mother's, it was from last semester, or last year, so it's in a box at my mom's house, never to be seen again, or it's buried somewhere on my hard drive. So these are all issues, and I'm losing all the work that I did. So let's talk a little bit about what we might do about that. So we've got a couple of options. One option is, kind of the option that I've been kind of focusing on. Work from the PDF, work on the PDF, or copy of your article, chapter, etc., and cross your fingers that you're not going to lose it. The second option is that you might kind of create a Word document for all your information, keeping things together, or you might use Google Drive. And Google Drive has some really nice research tools to kind of help you with citation and adding information in. So there's some real benefit to that. I might also want to use some note-taking software, and I'm really interested in personal information management. I actually teach a class on personal information management, and one of the things that I talk about is Evernote, and you can see here's an example of Evernote. So here you can see that I have, here's all my folders, and this is in a particular folder. Here's a particular item. Here's my annotation that I wrote. You can see properly this time it has a citation as well as the annotation. Notice that I have what we would call some metadata over here that makes it easier to find. I can tag this, academic libraries, annotations, so that later on if I want to I can just search for everything in my Evernote library or in this particular folder that I've tagged academic libraries or academic libraries and annotations. And I also have some dates there, so there's some useful information here. But again, I'm missing out on a lot of affordances to kind of keep track of things. So let's talk about another option. But before I do, I'm wondering how you all actually manage your citations. How do you manage keeping up with, Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, emailing everything to yourself? How do you keep up with citations? How do you keep up with notes, annotations, paper? How do people do that? Because I ask this question a lot, and everybody is always like, I have a Word document, I email stuff to myself, I lose it, can't keep track of it, only works for one project, it's not sustainable.
Kari says it's a mix between Google Docs and scribbling.
Yeah, I scribble too. But in addition to the scribbling, I'm going to take the next step that we'll see on the next slide. Google Docs are really good. It really helps everyone, but there's still some stuff you're missing, some affordances that you don't get on Google Docs, even though, like Google Keep, Evernote, Simple Note, they're multi-device, they're easy to access online, etc. There's some really good things there, and that's perfect, wonderful to use. But there are some things that you can use that actually give you more benefit. So let's talk about them. Let me try that again. Okay, so capturing the annotations and a lot of other stuff for the long haul. So I actually really believe in this particular resource. This is an example of a reference management program. And I'm actually talking about Zotero, but there are others. EndNote, EndNoteWeb, Mendeley, Citavi, RefWorks, ReadCube, etc. And there's a link here to a Wikipedia page that actually goes through a lot of these and explains kind of the things that they offer. But you can see that Zotero is a reference management system, and let's take a look at what it does. Let's think about what you can do with Google Drive, what you can do with Evernote, what you can do with your hand thing. You'll notice that I have three columns here. This first column is my organizing function, where I can organize my citations, my websites, my book chapters, my notes in something that is thematic-based or something that is a class-based or topical based, whatever I want. And you can see right now I'm actually looking at my Zotero library for annotated bibliographies. And here I have a bunch of sites. And they include citations for books. Actually, I don't have a book here, but I have PDFs, I have websites, I could also have books, I could have journal articles, etc. And for all of those, I have this third column. And you can see information gives all my bibliographic data, so that I can very easily just push this out and have it cited more or less in proper citation style, which is a really strong affordance for me. You'll see also there's a notes category. You can see I have 3 notes here. My annotation, which we've already seen, a little note here, a little meta note to myself, and then a reminder to myself if I'm citing this article from the WSU Libraries Research Exchange Institutional Repository versus the actual journal site, so there's a little reminder there. So I have these notes here. So I might have another note that actually goes through and is just quotations that I pulled from the article that I actually want to use in my paper with the page number. So it's all right there. I also have tags, and that's an organizing function. Over here I've organized things by project, by paper, by class, but sometimes I might want to organize it in a different way. I want to find everything in my Zotero library that has to do with voter registration and turnout in African nations. And so I could go through and find my tags, go to registration, Africa, and then specific African nations. And here you can see the tags that I've tagged my article, graphic novels, and academic libraries are academic libraries, graphic novels, and LOE authored. So you see two of these are content tags, academic libraries, graphic novels. This is a process tag. LOE, that's me, author. So if I want to go through and find anything that I've authored in my Zotero library, there it is. So see, now, let's go back to our situation. Remember,
quick question, Lorena.
We had that article that we had and that we lost. Now I never
Lorena.
annotate the heck out of it. Oops, is that a question?
Yeah, Kari would like to know if this is like Noodle.
It's like Noodle, but it's better. It's actually much more sustainable, and you can use it for writing dissertations, writing articles that get published in scholarly journals, etc. So now, you know, when I annotate my article, then I go in and I put my annotations in my notes field. And I sit there and I organize it. So now in one place, I have the PDF of the article, I have the bibliographic citation, I have my notes, and I have my organizing function through search, through the folders, and through my tags, and also through related. So this is really helpful. So now my annotation that I did, all my notes, they're not ephemeral. They're here someplace that can be backed up, both on hard drive and online, that if I'm sitting in class and somebody makes a reference to an article that I read 6 months ago, I just whip open my Zotero library and I've got all my notes. I raise my hand and actually make some really cogent and wonderful comment that impresses everyone. So really handy sort of thing. And I really encourage people to think about doing this. And if you're interested, this is something that I could potentially offer, you know, additional webinars for if that's something that people are interested in. But I do want to emphasize that there are alternatives. For anyone who is going into a professional program that requires professional development, or anyone who's thinking about going to graduate school, using a reference management program, any reference management program is really, really valuable. I really cannot emphasize that too much. Any questions about this? I guess I need to backtrack a little bit. Kari's mentioned Noodle, and one of the things I want to backtrack with is that you know, anytime you use something, you know, all of these things you have to you have to train yourself to use. You have to train yourself to annotate. You have to train yourself to use particular conventions. And the thing is, you know, something has to fit into your own workflow. And if Noodle fits into your workflow, and Zotero is like, I don't think so. Really not what I need right now. Stick with Noodle. Stick with what works. You know, what works, because it's better, you know, the best system is the system that you use. Always important. Okay, I'm almost done, but I want to kind of go back and talk about one more thing, because, you know, I have been emphasizing the notion of annotating on paper. Even with Zotero, you know, I've said I annotate on paper, and then I go over and I write it as notes, you know, and I extend those notes. I take a cryptic 2 or 3 word annotation and I extend it into something with a little bit more narrative, because that way I'll understand it more later on. I don't have to worry about reading with that handwriting. And because, you know, there is real value to writing something by hand and then copying it into, you know, into this document. But, you know, sometimes you may want to do something else. So let's briefly talk a little bit about digital annotation. And what digital annotation is that you usually work on it with a PDF usually. You're annotating directly on the PDF file. And it has a bunch of different modalities. If you look at my example, let's take a look. You'll notice that I've highlighted, and this is bad practice, by the way. Look at that, I highlighted that whole paragraph. Not good. This little thing right here is a note. I couldn't show more than one thing at the same time, but if I clicked on this, I would see a note, an annotation, a marginalia about that particular place that I put in. So here I have my underlining, here I have my notes. Up here, you'll notice I've highlighted some text, and then I can add another note like this one. I can highlight it again, I can underline it, I can strike out if I want to just be like, just forget this. But notice the other things. I can look up a definition, and then I can speak. Remember I said that sometimes I'm a little bit more talk than write? If I want to, I can do a verbal annotation that is saved on my computer, or in this case, my tablet, my iPad, and then I can go back and listen to it, which can sometimes be really nice. You know, again, sometimes it's easier to say something than to write it down. It just follows more. And if you look over here on the side, you'll see a lot of additional annotation tools over here. You know, I can add in text if I want. You know, I can add in shapes. I can put in arrows. I can put in smiley faces. I can create stamps that say significant and stamp on it. So lots of cool things that I'm able to do. Now, doing something like this, you know, it's really cool, and it works best on tablet, but you can also do it on your computer, on your desktop or your laptop, using Adobe. I wrote Adobe Viewer. I really meant Adobe Reader because that has, you know, some things here. But there are some problems. First of all, obviously, you know, you get the most affordances if you have a tablet. Don't do it on a smartphone, just don't. And you have to have a tablet. Tablets are expensive. The other thing is, like I said, you can do it on a laptop using Adobe Acrobat Pro or alternatives like Nitro, but usually traditionally the free version hasn't given you very many tools, although they've gotten a lot better. But you can't do things like speak, you know, but you can add in notes and type over with text and highlight and underline and make boxes and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of that is actually searchable as well. And one of the cool things is this. If I do all of this, if I mark up this PDF, I don't have to print it out with the markup. If I just want a clean copy, I can print out a clean copy, or I can print it out with a markup, so I have choice. And so there's a lot of value to this. I think the really big issue with this is not as fast as working with paper. But, you know, it might be easier to share. It's all right there on the paper. You know, it has its own advantages. And it might be something that you want to play around with. I'll tell you a use of this that people are doing a lot, which is if you are a teaching assistant or an instructor or a grader, sometimes it's actually easier for both you and the student if you use the voice capability and you actually go through and you grade the article, or you explain your grade with voice. Here we are here, this is why I did this. Here we are here, this is why I did this. Sometimes it's a lot easier to say it than it is to type it. So these are all kind of aspects of annotation. And again, you know, I haven't really talked too much about the hard and fast aspects of annotation, because there really isn't time for this. But I have some resources here that are very helpful. Hunter College has guidelines for writing a summary. And in addition to their guidelines for writing a summary, if you go all the way back on the URL to just this base level, they have a really good site that is, you know, just kind of like the Purdue OWL, but really focused on writing, and I really like that. Get rid of this. There's also this one here, the annotated bibliography. Here is Purdue OWL annotated bibliographies, and here is that Wikipedia site that I mentioned about reference management software. So these are some really good resources to take a look, think about that broader issue of annotating to summarize rather than annotating the article as you go along. And my final slide is actually the same final slide that I had last week, just to remind people about the resources for more information for that marginalia annotation. These are really helpful for that. So, any questions? I see Kari is excited by Zotero. And, oh, you were digitally annotating a PDF. What were you using? Oh, you know what I didn't do? I didn't actually mention, and I always forget this. I always forget something. I went back over here. I was using, this is for iPad only because that's what I have, but I was using PDF Expert. Other PDF annotating tools are Goodreader and iAnnotate and Notability. With Notability is a little bit more of the hands-on kind of trying to mimic actually cursive writing rather than the typing sort of aspect. But those are some of the tools that you might use, and all of those I believe offer those affordances that I mentioned. I really like PDF Expert, so that's the one that I use. Yes, just the tools that appear. Yeah. So the free reader, you know, not necessarily going to get those, like I said, you know, free. You're not going to get everything. Here is just something to think about. If you're for WSU students who are listening, and if you're not a WSU student but you are affiliated with another university, you probably have something similar. Our bookstore has a program where you can buy software for really good prices. And if you were to buy Adobe Acrobat Pro, it's about, on the open market, over $400. But buying it through WSU as a student, you can get that software for about $125. And PDF software, PDF Acrobat Pro is amazing. There's so much you can do with it. You know, it lets you do more annotation, lets you split up PDFs, create PDFs, do all sorts of cool things. So it's really kind of worth the money, and it lasts a long time. So you don't have to update it because it works for a long time. And $125 is a steal. So if you're interested in that, tweet me, WSU Lorena, and I will send you information on how to purchase it if that's something that you're interested in. Lots of free software as a student, so take advantage of it. Anything else? Alrighty, so I am going to turn you all back to Josh, and if you have questions about any of this, please, you're welcome to contact me. I'm WSU Lorena on Twitter, oenglish@wsu.edu as email. And thanks a lot. I really enjoyed doing these 2 webinars.
Thank you guys for attending tonight. I don't know about you, but I wish I had this information presented to me while I was still in school and reading books and writing papers. But I would like to remind you, if you have a few seconds, could you please fill out this survey? It helps us plan webinars and live streams in the future. And we have 3 live streams coming up this week as a reminder. If you go to connections.wsu.edu, you can read about them. We'll be live streaming a workshop, a concert on Thursday with the Humanitas Festival, and then on Saturday we'll be live streaming the Cougar Leadership Conference. Thank you guys, and we'll see you later.